I'm Craig Floyd. I'm the founding CEO Emeritus of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. For 34 years, I headed the organization. And right out of college, I had the good fortune of working for a man named Mario Biaggi, a congressman from New York City. Before that, he was a 23-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, the most decorated cop in New York City history. And he's really the founder of the memorial. He's the man who championed the cause in Congress. In 1984, we had a law enacted to build a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. Gave me the privilege of leading that effort. And for 34 years, I took that privilege and ran with it. And here we have this beautiful memorial, which was dedicated in 1991. And we went on to build a National Law Enforcement Museum right across the street, dedicated that in 2018. And we did a lot of other great work, I think, to make it safer for officers, to tell the story of American law enforcement, and to honor the service and the sacrifice of America's law enforcement professionals. Back in the 1970s, there was a detective on Long Island in New York, a man named Donald Guilfoyle, and he really had an idea to build the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. He went to his local congressman at the time. However, because they knew Congressman Biaggi was a former cop and was really the champion of law enforcement, they asked him to join the effort. And one of the reasons early on that I think it never really got traction, a couple reasons. One, I don't think the sentiment toward law enforcement in the military at the time was all that positive. Remember, this is the Vietnam War years. We just gotten through the war. I think the other issue that was an impediment was they wanted Congress to fund the memorial, and that became a challenge. In the end, it was privately funded, and I think that made a big difference when the legislation was reintroduced by Congressman Biaggi. I think we introduced the legislation in 1982 at the request of a group of law enforcement officers that came to our office. They asked him to reintroduce this legislation to build the National Memorial. And one of the reasons 82 was a significant date, that was the year that the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated. And so now everybody realized the importance of a national memorial. The names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial wall were so moving and poignant that we wanted to do something similar for law enforcement. And so now all of the law enforcement groups that we had been working with on other legislation coalesced, and they got fully behind this legislation. Congressman Biaggi said, I will reintroduce the bill to build a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial if you, the law enforcement groups of this nation, get behind it and promise to lobby for it and support it when the fundraising started. So they all agreed to do that. They joined our board of directors. A lot of those groups didn't necessarily like each other. They were rival unions. They were rank and file versus management. But when they walked into our boardroom, they left all that behind. And they had a common goal. Let's build a national monument honoring America's law enforcement officers. And they, along with Congressman Biaggi and a small group of staff, made it happen. We struggled during those early years. Congress gave us the authorization to build a national memorial honoring law enforcement, but really the rest of the work was left up to us. And very few people have ever built a national monument here in our nation's capital. And an idea was hatched. Why don't we talk to one man who had been successful at this? And his name was Jan Scruggs, and he built the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So I gave Jan a call out of the blue. He didn't know me, I didn't know him. We met. He told us the secrets of building a national monument. He said, Craig, this is a full-time job. You can't do this on a volunteer basis. You need a staff, you need an office, you need a full-time commitment to this endeavor if you really want to get it done. And that's exactly what we did. We hired Jan as our first full-time employee. He became our executive director for about 8 months before he went back to law school. And he got us on the right path. Initially, when we set out to find a suitable site for this memorial, like everyone else, we wanted to build it on the National Mall. You know, that's where the bulk of our nation's visitors come to Washington, D.C. And that's a difficult task because the mall is pretty much full of memorials and museums. We tried for the Ellipse, that big circular park between the Washington Monument and the White House. It seemed to get a little traction early on, but then the idea of building any memorial on the ellipse just didn't sit well with some of the powers that be and some of the review agencies. So we got their attention by going for the ellipse. They realized that we're serious, they want something special, we need to give them something special. So they took us on a tour of Washington, and they came here to Judiciary Square. And they explained the history of this site. This is one of the three major spaces George Washington and others built the city of Washington around. This was going to be the seat of criminal justice in our nation. And we felt that, wow, with that history and with this special place that is all law enforcement, we embraced it, and we got their approval for Judiciary Square. It's a 3-acre space, and it's the seat of our nation's criminal justice system, and we figured this is where it belonged, and we couldn't have chosen a better site, I don't think. Largely, this was a ill-kept park that DC controlled, but that the federal government owned. We basically made the argument that if we come here and put millions of dollars into this beautiful space, we could create something very special, a lot better than what it was. I mean, we had benches here that were breaking down, deteriorating. We had weeds and shrubs that hadn't been cared for in a long time. But in the end, I think that the right decisions were made, and everybody agreed that National Memorial to Law Enforcement was the right use of Judiciary Square. If you remember, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial had a very popular design competition that ended up with the design that is now the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Jan Scruggs, who had such great success really with a design competition, recommended that we not do a design competition. He said, you lose control of the final winning product. You spend a lot of time and a lot of money doing a design competition. And he said, you know, really what I would recommend is you commission an architect of your choice. We interviewed several. He recommended a guy named Davis Buckley. The fact that Davis had experience working with Jan Scruggs, I think helped a lot. We wanted somebody with experience, somebody that had dealt with the review process here in Washington, D.C. It can be very challenging. And he had the patience, he had the history. He had also designed the Japanese-American Memorial. So that was another example of Davis's work with a national memorial. Davis and I worked hand in glove to get all the approvals, to get the design created. He was very good at taking our ideas and turning them into a design. And it was Davis really that created this beautiful space that you see. With the help of the review agencies, interestingly enough. It took a couple years really to get the site selected, to get a design approved. You know, one of the early ideas that Davis had was take all the attention away from the Central Plaza here, because we had 2 metro elevator structures that were already in place. So he said, let's take all the attention away and put it to the outer perimeter of the site. The Fine Arts Commission chairman, Carter Brown, said, wait a minute, that's wrong. What you need is a pergola there in the central space to integrate the metro elevators into your design and have a beautiful pergola structure at the center of your national memorial. So that was an example of how Davis worked with the Fine Arts Commission and other review agencies to tweak the design that he originally came up with. In fact, when we went to build the National Law Enforcement Museum and we wanted to put the entrance to that museum on our site here at the memorial, they said, you know what? Your memorial is so perfect. We don't want anybody to disrupt it in any way. Leave it alone, because we love it the way it is. And I think everybody that comes here feels the same way.
Every day, some 800,000 law enforcement officers across our nation put their lives on the line for our safety and protection.
We had some great celebrities that got behind the idea of a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. And this again, Jan was a big believer in getting politicians and celebrities to lend their name and reputation to this project, as he did with his own Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And so one of the people we went to was Johnny Carson, of all people. And we had some good contacts in Burbank, California. A lot of the police there worked with Johnny Carson and the Tonight Show staff. And they got Johnny Carson to tape a PSA that we canvassed the nation with, let people know that people believe in this so strongly that even Johnny Carson is behind it.
Nearly every other day in our country, a police officer is killed. They die protecting you and me and our families.
We had people like Jimmy Stewart got behind it, Dennis Farina. a great actor. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but Dennis embraced this. He was a former Chicago police officer. And at the time, when we were building the memorial, he had a TV show on television on NBC that was quite popular. And we went to him and said, you know, Dennis, would you be willing to be our national honorary chairman? And he did PSAs. He came to a number of our events. He was here for the groundbreaking, for the dedication. Dennis was a great friend, and but that's how he got behind it. And just so many others that lent their name and reputation. And that helps because they have a following. And it gave us instant credibility with all of their followers. And that means millions of Americans started to believe in this project. The cost of the memorial, about $11 million. Most of it was raised through small donations, about $12 on average. A lot of the success was the result of a direct mail campaign. We canvassed the entire nation, sent them a letter saying, we want to honor America's law enforcement officers. Will you help us? Will you send a small donation to make it happen? And then we got some big corporations involved, and it kind of snowballed after that. All of the major law enforcement groups in this country got behind the project, embraced it as their own. It took 7 years from the beginning, 1984, when the law was enacted, to the dedication when President George H.W. Bush and his wife Barbara were here, where the walls were unveiled. There were 12,561 names there that first day when it opened. Today, the walls, unfortunately, are full, and we now have more than 24,000 names on the National Memorial. Initially, we thought of this memorial as not having names of the fallen officers because, frankly, there was no research done to tell us who those names were. We knew this would not have the personal impact without putting the names of the fallen officers. So how do we find out who these fallen officers are? We actually went to a telemarketing firm. We never did telemarketing to raise money. But we said, you know what, they could help us here because there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this country. How could we possibly call all of them ourselves and ask for the information about their fallen officers? But a telemarketing company could do that job for us very quickly, and they did. It took a matter of weeks. We ended up with 12,561 names originally on this memorial when we dedicated it in 1991. But every year since, we found not only new names, because unfortunately 150 or so officers die every year in this country on average, but we also were finding more names from the past. John Parsons from the National Park Service really was instrumental in this. He said, Craig, if you put these names on your memorial in some order, you're going to find names from the past that are going to disrupt that order. So why don't you think about just putting the names on the memorial randomly? So we took the 12,561 names, we put them in a computer, it spit it out randomly. So the names you see originally on this wall have no particular order. The name of an officer who died in 1970 is next to an officer who died in 1860, and they're not from the same department, they're not alphabetical. So there's no reason why in the future any name will disrupt the order on this wall.
At the time in 1991, they added what they thought was all of the historical names that they were aware of. At the time, based on historical trends, they thought that there was enough room on the memorial to have enough space for new names through the year 2100. We have far, far outpaced those original estimates, and this year, calendar year 2024, we added what is now the final line on the original memorial walls. Of course, well before I got here, my predecessors recognized that we were running out of space, and they commissioned an expansion, which was done in 2021. The expansion sits on top of what is the original memorial walls. It's very hard to tell. If I didn't otherwise tell you, you wouldn't probably even notice. But if you go out there, you can see that the walls near the lions, that is the original height of the memorial walls as it was, and now there is about an 18-inch cap of new marble graved granite on top of the original walls. It's the exact same granite marble that was originally used from the same quarry. And so now that new expansion gives us space for about an additional 12,000 names. Sitting here now, I don't even want to hazard a guess as to what year we might then fill up the expansion. Certainly, I think we will get through the mid-2050s, but we will not reach 2100 for sure. They vet every single one of those cases to say, yes, we view this as a line of duty death, which is vetted by a committee made up of our board members and active and retired sworn police officers, and they look at and examine every single one of those cases. Does this meet our criteria? Did the officer sustain an injury while they were performing some law enforcement function, and that injury then subsequently led to their death? We compile all those together. We try to have that process done by the end of January, and then it really is quite in-depth in terms of plotting, planning, templating out the names, actually printing out life-size strips, which we bring out to the memorial and place against the memorial wall on the panels in which they might be assigned, making sure that they fit there, that it's organically in the right space, that we haven't overflowed one or more lines. Then we revise the template again. We confirm with every single surviving family, is this your loved one's name? Is this the name that they went by? Sometimes they prefer their middle name as a first name. So all of those factors and more, we really try to triple check at every level. And then once that is locked in, we send the final template to the engraver. They print out these rubberized strips, which they then glue onto the memorial wall, and they come out again in mid-April with a sandblaster and this engraving equipment, and they etch every single name into the wall over the course of about 2 weeks.
The night before the memorial was dedicated, we did a names reading. Each and every one of those 12,561 names was read over a 24-hour period. Names were being read at 4 a.m. in the morning here. And you could hear a pin drop, and yet there would be hundreds of people standing by, listening for their loved one's name or their colleague's name from their department. It was a very moving event. And then we dedicated the memorial. And then every year since, we've had a candlelight vigil, and we said, you know what? Every new name that goes on this memorial after the original ones, we need to give them that same honor. So now every year at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Candlelight Vigil, we read the names of the new additions to the memorial wall for that particular year. And it's really been a touching part of that candlelight vigil and in this memorial. Davis had always envisioned that the pathways of remembrance and the memorial walls would be shaded by these beautiful pleached trees. You'll notice the trees in the central plaza are more open and free. The trees here along the pathway of remembrance much more formal. You're entering a very special precinct. So the trees give you the shade, but they also give you a sense of formality. You know, we had a choice early on. We wanted to put figurative statues of police officers, basically. Well, when you really think about it, that's almost impossible. So many different uniforms, so many different parts of our population becoming part of the law enforcement profession. That was an impossibility. So we decided to go with a symbolic representation of law enforcement. That's why you see a male lion and a female lion. That represents all of law enforcement, right? Now you have a female lion in a very peaceful repose, paw draped over the wall, looking over a group of sleeping cubs. The mere presence of a law enforcement officer is usually enough to keep the peace, right? And the cubs obviously representing the innocent citizens of our nation who are not worried about anything because they know they have a protector watching over them, the law enforcement officer. And then here at the other end of the memorial, you have two male lions that are in a much more aggressive posture because occasionally law enforcement needs to use force to keep the peace. They're going up against a lot of evildoers. And so now you have a male lion that's ready to do whatever is necessary to protect the innocent citizens of our nation. And you'll notice the cubs across from the male lion, one of its head is popped up, ears perked, as if it senses some danger lurking about. But then you look across and you have its defender ready to do whatever is necessary to protect those innocent people. I love the symbolism. It goes so beautifully with this memorial. And as you enter the pathways of remembrance, you're greeted by these lion statues that tell you you're entering a very special place. The inscriptions here, to me, that was one of the most interesting parts of the process. How do you choose 4 inscriptions out of all the things that have been said about law enforcement, out of all the biblical scriptures and all the rest? And it took months, really. We had a committee that was designated to pick the inscriptions under the 4 lions that sit here at the memorial. And in the end, we chose a quote from President George H.W. Bush's groundbreaking speech, and we chose an inscription from a survivor, Vivian Eney Cross. Vivian had said, and I love this quote, it's said often, it is not how these officers died that made them heroes, it is how they lived. And that really speaks so well to the essence of this memorial. Too many people, I'm afraid, think of the memorial as only honoring the fallen. But this memorial was really built as a monument to all of law enforcement, anyone who's ever served. You don't have to die to become a hero if you're in law enforcement. The fact that you go out every day and risk your life, put your life on the line for others, that makes you a hero. And this memorial honors them as well. And then we wanted an inscription that would somehow speak to the lion symbolism. And we chose, "The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion." I just love that biblical scripture. And then finally, the one that I probably use more than any, "In valor there is hope." And that's from Tacitus, a Roman historian of great renown. And in valor there is hope, to me, everybody can interpret it a little differently, but it means as long as there are men and women among us who are willing to go out every day and risk their lives for our safety and our protection, there is indeed great hope for all of us in the future of this nation. We estimated the crowd at our memorial dedication at 25,000 people. And we knew it was going to be big. We just didn't know quite how big. But we decided, and with the court's help across the street, erected 2 huge grandstands and that were packed full of people on dedication day. And we had this wonderful singer, Anthony Johnson, police officer, who sang Amazing Grace. And as he sang that song, honor guards would remove the drapes from the memorial walls. And that was really the opening moment, if you will, for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. So poignant. I don't think there was a dry eye in the place. And then following, we had President Bush and his wife Barbara go over to where the male lion is at the end of the west wall. And they were handed 2 red roses by these 2 young girls, daughters of a West Virginia state trooper who had been killed on the line of duty, whose name was now on the memorial wall. And I'll never forget, they gave us $25. They sent us a check for $25. They had sold their toys in a garage sale and raised money so their father's name would be part of this national monument. And so when we thought about how are we going to do the ribbon cutting or the opening moment for the memorial, let's have President Bush and Mrs. Bush place a red rose on the wall, given to them by those 2 young girls. And it worked beautifully, and it was a very touching moment. It's the only moment really that I kind of lost it that day.
It's a memorial that's ever changing because sadly every year more names are added to it, but it's a place for survivors to come and pay respect to officers that have given their lives protecting the citizens of this country. It's important to have that place. I think it's great that it's within Washington, D.C., where the monuments and memorials are. And I think it's important to the survivors, the families, other officers, that every year we can gather here together, united as one, and pay respects to everyone that's given the ultimate sacrifice, to include the survivors that have lost their loved ones.
Coming from a law enforcement background, I've experienced line of duty deaths. I know what it's like. I know the collateral damage that happens to not only the community and the family, but the organization. And it's very significant for us to have this memorial here for folks to begin the healing process or continue the healing process. And we see that here every day when we walk the memorial and we talk to folks, individuals, especially during Police Week, that come here. This for them, for many, is the beginning stages of that healing process.
So why is the memorial important? You know, I think it's important in a variety of different ways. There's a quote on the southwest corner of the memorial. It's from then President Bush, who was here at the inauguration of the memorial. It says,
"The story to be carved on these walls is the story of America, of a continuing quest to preserve both democracy and decency, and to protect a national treasure that we call the American dream."
And that quote has always resonated with me. It says that law enforcement has been and continues to be an integral part of that American story. It says that the men and women, my peers, your police officers, have been and continue to be protectors of our very sacred democracy. It says that there is a cost every single year in terms of protecting that democracy, tragically measured in hundreds of lives of men and women who are out there in our communities protecting us, protecting our democracy. And that cost is measured in, to date, 24,067 men and women who have laid their lives on the line for us. And so I hope that this memorial stands as that beacon and also as thanks on behalf of what I might argue is a grateful nation.
I pulled up a chair right after the ceremony was over. Everybody else was at the wall, doing an etching of their loved one's name. And we just kind of took a deep breath and relished the moment that, all that work had finally come to fruition. Here we had a national monument that we'd worked so hard to build. And it was certainly one of the greatest, if not the greatest moments of my life.